Good day, fellow captains, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Tier 7 Premium Japanese Light Cruiser Suzoya with 15 relatively rapid-firing 155mm guns. This ship is probably one of the better Japanese cruisers in the game. Given it's a premium, that's not really surprising, but with the right commander and the right playstyle, this boat can cause a lot of problems for the enemy team. And this game is a great example of just that. Now, I am aware that this is a free-to-play game, and not everybody is going to want to spend money or have the ability to spend money on the game to get, say, the Suzoya. One of the reasons why I'm making this now is there's a new line of Japanese cruisers out, and there is a free version, essentially, of this ship that's available now. It's not exactly the same, but it's, pretty close. So, given that fact, you are getting a video with 2 different boats for the price of 1. And I'm pretty sure you didn't pay anything because it's YouTube and it's all free, so yeah, price is nothing. Anyway, I'm going to run that ship in the next section. That's going to be the next match, but right now, let's take a look at what the Suzoya is capable of. Now, I am well aware that this is Tier 7. However, given that, I tend to equate this ship with the American light cruiser, the Boise, because they both have 15 guns. In the end, I tend to think that the Boise is like the half-baked version of what this ship ended up becoming in the end. Just for this game, not in history or anything. And the reason why I say that is because the torpedoes that the Suzoya have put it on another level altogether. And I'm well aware the difference between Tier 6 and Tier 7, there's going to be improvements when you step up to Tier 7, of course. And the Boise does have faster firing guns, I'm pretty sure. Wait, I'm probably wrong there. Anyway, the point being, this ship having those 15 155mm guns make it a fire starter, and to focus on that with your commander just makes it that much more dangerous. Typically when I'm in a match, and especially early on in Suzoya's career when it was first released, God, I would see so many fires get started, and typically you'd see more than one Suzoya in a match at a time, because it's new and everyone wants to run the new boat. And yeah, not too many dev strikes happening against Suzoyas, and the reason for that is you can build this with a relatively fast rudder. Even though this ship has a pretty big turning circle, that rudder makes up for it in avoiding enemy shells. And with how the torpedoes are placed on board, it makes it a perfect candidate for being a kite cruiser. Given that it's a light cruiser, I'm not surprised. Speaking of light cruisers, you may have noticed that quite a few of my videos are based on light cruisers, and well, you got me. I love them. They're fantastic. I love starting fires, I love pissing off battleships, and frankly, I love being agile, and that's what these ships are all about. As you can see, I already have a bunch of fires, and it really hasn't been that long that I've been in this game. In the end, that's what these cruisers are all about. 1, shooting rapidly, or at least relatively rapidly, depending on the country that you're using. 2, starting fires, and making it so that the enemy has to burn through their health pool in order to stay in the fight, and burn through their consumables to stay in the fight. And 3, agility. making the enemy shoot at you, thinking they're going to hit you, only to miss you completely, bounce, shatter, or do minimal damage, therefore mitigating the damage that they do. I absolutely love this playstyle. It's something that I fell in love with even back when I was playing in the PC version, and that kind of spilled over into the console version today. So you just saw me exchanging shots with an enemy Suzuya, and at some points I had all of my guns on, showing full broadside to him, so I could fire all of my guns at him. Now when he fired, I would turn in and mitigate any kind of damage that he's doing by thickening my armor by going straight onto him from the angles of his guns. The only reason that's possible is because of the build and the rudder shift time on this ship. A rudder shift time of 1.9 seconds, second only to the Tier 7 Premium American heavy cruiser, the Wichita, which has a rudder shift time of 1.6 seconds, I'm fairly certain. This makes this ship just a problem to deal with, especially when dealing with other cruisers or destroyers. The rudder shift time makes it so you can easily dodge torpedoes, as long as you have a good idea of where those torpedoes are coming from, and also dealing with enemy cruiser shells, as long as they're fired from fairly far away, and you're not dealing with a cruiser with larger guns, like, say, I don't know, the Azuma. Now you're going to see me make a big mistake here, and I do not recommend you do this. Please pay attention to the map and where you're at on the map. I don't know why I did this, but you know, it happens from time to time. You get in the zone, you want to get kills, you want to add up your damage, but I sailed out of the capture point, and well, the capture point is honestly worth more than any kill you're going to get in the game. So if you get the chance, don't do what I just did here and sail out of the cap when you're the only one in there and you're about to capture. That was a bit of a boo-boo. With that said, that is it for this little chunk of gameplay. And this match went pretty well. It's not the best game I've ever played, but now we're going to slide on over to the other game in the Shimanto, a very similar ship to the Suzuya. Before this match really gets started, I want to clarify that this ship is pretty much brand spanking new, so I have the modifications, but I don't have any upgrades that come with using the ship and experience gained. This is like, I think, the third match that I ever played in this ship, so yeah, the stats are not as good as they could be. However, with that said, let's start talking about some of the things that make the Shimanto versus the Suzuya. One of the things is this torpedo angle that you saw on the screen and how far forward you can send these torpedoes. The reason for that is these torpedoes turn to the angle that you send them when they get launched. So even though they roughly look like they have the same setting on the hull as the Suzuya, the torpedoes themselves are able to turn when you launch them, giving you a better angle to send your torpedoes at. Something to consider when it comes to close quarters encounters and sending your torpedoes early in a match, or when you're turning, finding good angles to send your torpedoes when you're in trouble. Now, my first impressions of the ship are a little lackluster, to say the least, with the short range of the guns and the odd number of torpedoes that you get compared to other Japanese cruisers, 3 and 3 on each side for a total of 6 a side instead of 8 or more. I feel like this cruiser is extremely underwhelming when it comes to other Japanese cruisers at the same tier, especially against the Suzuya. The guns themselves, as I just said, are extremely short range, and you really have to put a lot of effort into extending the range with your commander. That being said, these guns are pretty good in fights against destroyers, I've noticed. However, they are underwhelming, especially against enemy cruisers when trying to use AP. This is something to consider when you're fighting against an enemy cruiser at range. If you're fighting against an enemy cruiser at range and you're trying to catch that Citadel with these guns at 150 millimeters, chances are you're gonna bounce or shatter. These guns just do not have penetrating power like the 155s on the Suzoya. The one saving grace for this ship's guns, though, is the 360-degree rotation on 4 of the 5 turrets. The first turret doesn't rotate 360 degrees, but that's okay. 4 out of the 5 ain't bad. So, when you find yourself kiting, and I recommend that you do if you are using this ship because of how it's designed, you will have most of your guns on target most of the time. And given the fact that these guns rotate, I believe stock 6 seconds, 180 degrees, that number 1 turret will reach its target in no time at all. So that's not a problem at all. The main problem is the underwhelming performance of the armor penetration, the also underwhelming fire chance rate, which is kind of wild. You'd think they'd give this ship some kind of advantage in some way. However, they didn't. With the build that I have on the ship, I believe it's only a little over 10%, which is pretty crazy, given that I have the same commander on this ship as I do on the Suzoya. So you would think it would have a even better fire chance, given that the base reload is 15 seconds. 15 seconds for 150 millimeter guns is atrocious. It should be nowhere near that high of a reload rate. It's pretty crazy. I'm not really sure what Wargaming is thinking on that one, but you know, money's money, and they want people to buy premium, I assume. So maybe using this ship is going to cause some frustration in the community, and they're going to say to themselves, I could get the Suzoya instead and have a better experience. Sure, I guess you could, but only if you really want to open your wallet. Now, this ship is not necessarily bad, but it's definitely not good compared to its sister. Their turret rotation is great, however, the rudder shift time is pretty lackluster compared to the Suzoya. Suzoya is 1.9, I believe, with it fully built. As for the Shimanto, however, and keep in mind I do not have the upgrade for it, 3.2 seconds. So I'm sure you can get it quite a bit lower, but compared to 1.9, it's just not as good, especially given this is a pretty lightly armored cruiser. It's the same hull as the Mogami, but as you may know if you've used the Mogami is basically made of tissue paper, wet tissue paper at that. So just about anything is going to penetrate you from just about any angle, especially at range from battleship shells and plunging fire. This deck is only 27 millimeters thick, so yeah, don't expect any kind of shells to bounce off of your deck when you're trying to avoid fire from a Kansas or an Iowa. Okay, with all of that said and laid out on the table, I will say this. This is an okay ship. It's great at what it was designed to do, which is kite. It's designed to kite. This cruiser, I don't think, was ever intended to push into an enemy position and displace the enemy out of fear. You might be able to do that with torpedoes, but chances are, with the limited number of torpedoes that it has compared to other ships in this tier, that's not going to happen. I think a lot of enemy players are going to be feeling pretty confident that they're going to be able to avoid the limited number of torpedoes that you have. Even though they're hard-hitting torpedoes, that's irrelevant. If an enemy thinks that they can snake through your send, you are kind of snowed given the underwhelming penetration of these shells. If you're relying on your guns against an enemy, good luck, bud, because you're going to need it. Unless the enemy has absolutely no health remaining, you're going to be in big trouble. There are very few scenarios that I can see that this ship is going to have the advantage when it comes to guns. One being destroyers. Sure, destroyers probably not going to have much chance against you and your 150mm guns. Don't count on you getting rid of them quickly, though, given the abysmal reload time. When it comes to enemy cruisers, however, either light or heavy, I think it's going to be a mixed bag of either you luck out and you win because they missed their shots or they chose the wrong shell, or you're just better at the game and so you kill them. Or the other side, where they absolutely murder you and you never had a chance to begin with. And with that, that's the end of the match. And there you can see the stats and the fact that this ship isn't spectacular, and it didn't have spectacular results. I kind of lucked out there and got on a team that really kind of carried this ship. This ship, again, had no upgrades, so it was kind of hard to keep the damage output growing, but I did what I could with what I had, as it is with most light cruisers. That being said, I will say I don't particularly love this ship, but I enjoyed playing it while I did. All in all, I would have to say between the two, I enjoy my time more in the Suzuya than I do in the Shimanto, just in general. Now, basing that off of just limited games in the Shimanto versus a bunch of games in the Suzuya, and I mean a bunch. I can't even tell you how many games I've played in the Suzuya, but it is a lot. Jumping over to the upgrades for the Suzuya, you can see I have Aiming Systems Mod 1. That was a choice I made so I could get those torpedoes around when need be, and also for the main battery dispersion. Secondary battery mod 2, I would absolutely never use. Those secondaries are pretty much worthless. I don't know why you'd ever choose that. For the AA, you might be able to use that since the AA is so bad on the Suzuya. And main battery mod 2, you could potentially use to get your guns swung around, but it ain't for me. As for the second mod, steering gears mod 2, I definitely am heavy on the rudder shift time for this ship, and you can see that in the upgrades. I chose steering gears mod 3 for my third upgrade in order to get that rudder shift time down as low as possible, and that's why it is so low. As for the fourth, gunfire control systems mod 2, main battery dispersion and main battery range. It's pretty important for this ship to keep your guns on. Torpedo launcher mod 3, I would absolutely never use it. There's no point. You're just going to get your torpedoes knocked out, and then that's a waste of a mod. As for the other one, main battery mod 3, where you get main battery reload time, but you lower your traverse speed a little bit, I wouldn't do it. It's not really worth it in the Suzuya, just to keep your range up so that when you're in a fight against a battleship, you can continue to stay at arm's length, burn them, and it's harder for them to hit you, especially with that quick rudder. As for consumables, you can see the sonar is pretty decent. You get 2 of them, catapult fighter to add on to the sonar when the sonar is on cooldown or you're out of them, and repair party of 228 health per second, which isn't great, but in a moment you're going to see it's actually better than the other ship, the Shimanto. As for the stats, survivability 38,000, 10% torpedo damage reduction. So a little bit of torpedo damage reduction, but really not much. Do not rely on that. As for artillery, 155 millimeter 5x3 with a range roughly of 18 kilometers, a 9-second reload time, and a 25-second roughly 180 turn time. Ugh, pretty rough on the turret traverse time, but that's not what you're really looking for. You're looking for speed on the reload and rudder shift with this build. And so with an 11.8% chance of setting fires with that reload time, you're going to get a lot of fires. As for the torpedoes, 4x4, so 8 torpedoes on each side, reloading every 109 seconds with a 180 turn time of 6 seconds and a damage output of roughly 17,000 damage. The torpedoes are really good at 11 kilometer range. Now they do get spotted from pretty far out, 1.7 kilometers, but they're for screening. They're not for accurately targeting an enemy at any point. They're mostly for screening so that you can continue to run and get away from whatever's trying to hunt you down. As for AA, you can see it is pretty low, 44. I'm not going to rattle off the stats of each of them. You got some 13 mil, some 25 mil, some 27 mil, 127 mil, but don't rely on it. That's why you have the catapult fighter. As for maneuverability, that's where it's at. 37.3 knots, a 750 meter turning circle, and a rudder shift time of 1.9 seconds. That is what makes this ship shine. As for concealment, again, that's not what you're building for, so it doesn't really matter. 1.7 kilometer detectability range, and should you have a friend with you, a 6 kilometer range when firing in smoke where you get spotted. As for getting spotted by air, 7.4 when you're not firing your guns, and about 10 or a little over 10 when you are firing your guns. So just something to consider if you're going up against aircraft. As for the armor, you can see that it is pretty darn light compared to some of its competition from other countries, especially American cruisers. Those cruisers are usually pretty well armored, especially like the Baltimore or the Wichita. Now you can see that torpedo protection, hence the 10%. It's 12 millimeter plating, which is just about nothing. It's like having a little destroyer strapped to your side. It means nothing, and I wouldn't expect it to bounce anything when you're dealing with enemy shells incoming. Now, when peeling away the front and back armor, you can see that Citadel in the front and the back. This is where you can get in a little bit of trouble if high caliber guns are shooting at you and they pen your nose. They definitely can Citadel you, so something to consider. This is why I'm trying to convey that rudder shift time is so important. You want to avoid a majority of shells. Even if one shell catches you and Citadels you, it's going to be a big problem. Now you can see it does have a little bit of a turtle back, but it's also not something that you should rely on to keep damage off of your ship, because some of that Citadel is sticking above the waterline that is not angled plate. As for the guns, you can see the guns have 25 millimeter plate. These guns can get knocked out pretty darn easy. It's happened to me before. It's even happened in the Shimanto. So don't expect these guns to stay in the fight the entirety of the match. There are definitely going to be times where they get knocked out. That's just part of the game. Now, sliding over to the Shimanto. I want you to keep in mind there's no upgrades, right? These are just the basic modifications you get when you first get the ship. Aiming Systems Mod 1. I picked the same thing as I did with the Suzuya. And it's all about that main battery dispersion and a little bit with that torpedo launch traverse speed. Because these torpedoes have a better angle than the Suzuya. So getting those around are a little bit more important in this boat than in the Suzuya. As for these other modifications, I wouldn't even think about it. The secondary, no way. These secondaries are worthless. As for the AA, maybe. Just maybe you might want to pick that, but only if you plan on running with a friend who you know is carrier heavy when they play the game. Other than that, you're probably not going to run into a carrier anyway. As for the other one, main battery mod 2, you're not going to need this. These guns spin so fast at a base level, you're just going to waste this upgrade. You're gonna waste this modification. I don't think you need this. That's why aiming systems mod 1 is the way to go, because that main battery dispersion is going to be important to get more shells on target, especially given your slow reload time. As for the second mod, steering gears mod 2, and you can probably already see I basically built it the same as the Suzuya. There could be something to say about the stop-start build that you see used a lot with Russian cruisers, but personally, this cruiser is very long and very lightly armored. I wouldn't risk using that modification with this ship and trying to dodge shells that way, especially given this ship does not have long-range guns at all. So staying at arm's length while you're doing the stop-start, not really a possibility. As for the third mod, steering gears mod 3, you can see I chose steering gears mod 3. With this ship, it's all about kiting the enemy, dragging them into your friends, or dragging them into the limited number of torpedoes that you have. That's your mainstay. You could use concealment systems mod 1. I would rather have the faster rudder, since this rudder is a little slower than, say, the Suzuya or the Wichita. I'd rather stack on as much rudder shift time as I can get it as low as possible, so that when I am kiting, it's a little bit easier to avoid fire, because eventually you're going to get spotted anyway, even with the concealment mod. So you might as well be able to dodge shells. As for the fourth modification, gunfire control systems mod 2. So it's the same. The reason why, that main battery dispersion and the range, stacking onto the range. The torpedo launcher mod, again, I wouldn't choose it. You're only going to put yourself in a position to have those destroyed, and that mod is worthless. Main battery mod 3, no way. I know that there's going to be people that say, well, you're going to lower the reload time. 10% is not enough to mitigate the gain that you're going to get from gunfire control systems mod 2 and the range that you're going to get, because the range is so awful on this ship. Personally, for me, I'd rather have that little bit of range than bring my reload down 1.5 seconds. It's not worth it. As for your consumables, sonar, you have 3 of them, 4.3 on both sides. As for the torpedo and ship detection, it lasts 60 seconds and it reloads in 104 seconds. So, not bad. Personally, I think it's pretty good. Adding on to that, catapult fighter. I would, in my opinion, use catapult fighter to add on to your ability to spot, and I would not use the defensive fire because it's kind of a wasted consumable, especially when the catapult fighter can spot torpedoes and spot enemy ships from around an island. The other consumable cannot. Repair party. As you can see, 200 damage per second, not very good. It's actually worse than the Suzuya, and the Suzuya's consumable is not that good to begin with. So, again, something to consider. As for her stats, these stats are not going to be great in any way. Just as a preface, 40,100 and a torpedo damage reduction of 13%, 3% more. Big whoop. Okay. It does have a decent health pool, but when you see the armor, you're going to see why that's not special. As for the artillery, 5 times 3, 150 millimeter instead of 155s. A range of 16.4 at tier 7 is awful, and I built it for range. Reload time of 13.5, awful. A 180 degree turn time of 6 seconds, pretty darn good. But you can see that fire setting chance is 10.9. Not very good. Not very good for guns that take forever to reload. That is one of my main gripes with this ship, is that fire setting chance should be much higher for the reload speed that this ship has. As for torpedoes, 4 times 3, 6 aside, a reload time of 120 seconds, a 180 turn time of 6 seconds, and a maximum damage output of over 20,000 damage. Now they do go a little farther, 13.5. They do go a little faster, 57 knots instead of 56, but they do get spotted at the same range as the Suzuya, 1.7 kilometers. So they're okay. They have a better launch angle, but they're absolutely nothing special. So it's not something that you're going to want to rely on to deal with multiple enemy ships while attacking them. It's for kiting really only. As for AA defense, I don't think you need to build into it. It's got a naturally good AA defense, not outstanding, but enough to deal with any kind of aircraft that are harassing you. Now, if you're silly and you try to bring this into a legendary match with friends, which I do not recommend, that legendary aircraft is going to chew you to pieces. Maneuverability of 37.3 knots, 830 meter turning circle, which is pretty awful, and a rudder shift time of 3.9 seconds. Now, that's quite a bit less than the Suzuya, but it is serviceable. Concealment, 11.7 kilometer range at sea, awful. 7.3 from air, and 5.8 if you're firing from your friend's smoke. This could be utilized in that regard, but given that this ship needs, I would almost say, requires island cover to stay alive or to stay mobile in the backfield, I don't ever recommend using a friend's smoke and firing from that. If you ever catch a torp in this thing, it's going to be the last mistake you make until you get back into another game. As for armor, this basically has the same armor as the Suzuya or the Mogami, 25 millimeter plate all around, except it has a little bit of a thicker torpedo belt than the Suzuya, but not by much. As you can see, when all the layers are peeled away, it's pretty much the same. Slightly turtleback armor with a citadel that sits slightly above the waterline, so that turtleback does not really matter. As for the back plate, I was hoping that there was going to be some sort of orange plate on the side and the back to make it a more effective kite ship, but it does not. As for the top plate, 27 millimeters. Now you're thinking yourself, oh, that's not bad. Well, it ain't great either, and I can tell you right now, if a Kansas sees you from over 10 kilometers away, those plunging shells are going to punch straight through that 27 millimeter plate and head right into that big old citadel you're looking at right now. And, well, it's back to port for you, bud. However, for the guns, it's not bad, especially the front plate and the top plate on the turret. Not bad at all. Better than the Suzuya. I would argue you could probably even go up against, say, a Wichita if you were to angle your turrets properly, and you might be able to keep your guns in action. Now, with the turret rotation that it has, I think that's easier to do than, say, in the Suzuya. And with all that in mind, what is my take on this ship, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. It's not that good. I was hoping that I was going to make this video and I was going to be able to tell you that you could get this ship and you don't have to worry about the Suzuya. You don't have to worry about using your credit card and buying the balloons and getting the Suzuya. But after using this ship, at least for now, at least without the upgrades, I'd rather have the Suzuya. It's just way, way better. And it's mostly because of the gun range. The gun range and the gun reload speed. The reload speed is almost unredeemable, as is the range of the guns. I don't understand why Wargaming made this ship the way it is, but when they did that, they made it almost unplayable. And honestly, that's the best I could say about the ship, which is kind of sad. Well, now let's you and I have a seat and have a little cup of tea and talk about the commander. We have here Haguro, and I understand that she's premium. Not everyone's going to have her, but I have her. That's what I'm using. That's what I used for the Shimanto, and that's what I used for the Suzuya. The deck is on fire as her first trait. Chance of cruiser HE shells causing fire, 0.85%, not much, but cruiser main battery range, plus 2.55%. And as far as I'm concerned, I need all the range I can get, so that is the choice that I've made here. With her first skill, I've chosen Beyond Range because, yeah, range. This ship, I think, starts out with like 14-kilometer range, which is, as far as I'm concerned, unacceptable at tier 7 for a cruiser. That's just pretty much asking to get deleted as soon as the match starts. So that's what I've chosen. As far as the other two skills that are available, personally, I wouldn't, because it's taking away from that range that you really absolutely need. As for the second skill, you can see I've chosen Full Speed Ahead. With Full Speed Ahead, maximum cruiser speed and faster rudder shift time by 10%. The maximum speed doesn't matter so much. It's fine if you're trying to catch destroyers, but that rudder shift time is where it's at when you're a kiting cruiser. And that's why Full Speed Ahead is the choice that personally I will always make. As for the third skill, Hellfire. Armor penetration of HE shells of your cruiser, plus 5%. Cruiser main gun HE shell damage, plus 6%. Now, the reason why this one is so important is the armor penetration of HE shells. You're probably always gonna, or almost always gonna, use HE shells, and these are 150 millimeter, not 155. You need that penetration in order to do damage. As for the other skills, I wouldn't choose Velocious because you don't really need the overall speed for the ship. You're not trying to catch Italian cruisers. And as for Fortified, sure, you could pick it. You can last a little bit longer in a match, but I want to do damage. I want my ship to be at least somewhat viable when it comes to engaging the enemy, so Hellfire it is for me. You choose whatever you want. Now, as for skill number 4, this, I have a feeling is going to be a little bit more controversial. Steer clear. I am probably always going to choose this skill. Rudder shift time and steering gear repair time. The repair time not so important, but the rudder shift time is, especially for a kiting cruiser. God, how many times have I said this? However, with Fixated, cruiser main shell grouping, pretty good. Main battery dispersion, both plus 3%. Now, you could land a lot more shots with Fixated other than steer clear. But if you choose that, you probably won't stay in the match as long as I will. We can test that theory one day, but I'm just saying. As for the legendary skill, Refill Station. Yeah, cruiser main battery reload time. Sure, plus 5%. But that special effect when a friend is near you and at least 2 kilometers away, cruiser main battery range plus 10%. Now I really should upgrade her so that circle is expanded when a friend is near you, but I have not. As for fully packed, you could, but I'd rather have that chance for a longer range in my main batteries. It's all about keeping ships that can easily penetrate your ship further away so you have more time to react and dodge their shells. As for inspiration, the first one, Andre Roux, Grenadier Cruiser Main Gun HE Shell Damage plus 4.5%. Sure, yeah, pretty good. I want my shells to do a lot of damage, and you saw that when I looked at the stats, it was almost 3,000 damage a shell, almost as much as the AP shells do against a target, which is pretty good. Now for the second inspiration, Francisco Mimbelli, time to make a move, cruiser main battery reload time plus 4.95%. This is almost a must with this ship because how slow she reloads. I really wouldn't choose any other inspiration other than Francisco Mimbelli, and it just makes it so that you're absolutely not waiting the total 15 seconds to reload your 150 millimeter guns that don't do a lot of damage to begin with. Now, I just want to say I did mix it up a little bit here, and I tried something a little different because I've been rattling on about range and, oh, these guns need range and range. Well, I'll tell you what, I changed one of the inspirations. And I changed the first inspiration. I took off Roux and I put on Kuznetsov. And with Kuznetsov, yes, plus 5.7% more main battery range because you need it. And I can tell you after I did that and I looked at the stats, all in all, it was still only at 17.4. And this is heavily, 17.2. And this is like pretty much all focused on range, which is pretty wild. Now, with the upgrade that you get after you rank up this ship, you are going to get another 1.4 kilometers. But that's only 1.4 kilometers on top of the base. It's just not enough. It's really not. And I can only say that this makes this ship already obsolete pretty much as soon as it entered the game. In this game, on World of Warships Legends, as a light cruiser, it's all about range and maneuverability. If you don't have these two things, especially at tier 7, where the enemy's going to have sonar and radar and there's aircraft flying around and there's destroyers spotting you, even if you have smoke, you're going to get radared because there's a bunch of radar cruisers running around. And I can tell you, if you do not have range, if you can't stay at range, especially with something like this that is a kiting cruiser with pretty low caliber guns, you're not going to survive. Just think about an Atlanta. How long on average does an Atlanta survive in a match, especially when it's against other cruisers with longer range guns? It's pretty rare and almost never seen. And the reason for that is you can't outgun somebody that you can't hit. Again, it's something to consider. This ship is literally already obsolete as soon as it jumped in the game, and it's brand new. Now, I know it's not brand new to World of Warships, but it's new to World of Warships Legends, and it's extremely underwhelming. If you enjoyed this content, consider subscribing. Leave a like, hit the notification bell for future content like this, and even comment down below letting me know any ships that you're interested in seeing a closer look at, any ships you're interested in seeing gameplay of, or even other games you might be interested in seeing. I'm Buckshot Bucky. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.